we are going to do some watercolor painting. So you can see I have my number 8 round, which you can use. I'm going to encourage you to use it for most of it. I also have this 1-inch flat, and I'm going to show you how, even though it might seem like a bad idea to try to paint one of these with this, that you can actually do it. And it actually benefits you to practice that control. I've got 3 leaves that I've drawn here and then a blank piece of paper, and we're going to use all 3 of these to do some different techniques. I've got a palette of watercolor paints here. What's important for you to see is that it's kind of a mess. If I don't bring a lot of water onto this plate, I can keep all of these colors separate. For a small painting like this, that should be relatively easy to do. So yeah, I'm going to set that over here. I also have a large cup of clean water. And so the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to paint one of these leaves, is I'm going to take my brush and I just want to get it nicely wet. So I'm just kind of bringing the brush into the water, set my cup aside, and I'm going to choose one of the colors to paint one of my leaves. So I'm going to paint it, because this first technique I'm going to show you wet on wet. I'm going to use some yellow and some orange, I think. What's important to know is that I have water on the brush, so when I bring it to this yellow paint, it's going to kind of wake it up, and now that paint's going to be ready for me to paint. For this first technique, wet on wet, I just want to use a clean brush. So even though I've just got that paint wet, I'm going to clean my brush so that there's no longer yellow paint on it. And I'm going to select one of my leaves. And I just want to, this is important, I want you to practice control. I want to paint with just the water out to the edge of this leaf. Now, please notice, you probably have already, that the ink from the pen that I used to draw this leaf is bleeding. So that means that it was not permanent ink. But I kind of like the effect. I think it makes the leaf, the finished leaf, look a little bit more interesting. When I say practice control, so I am controlling my brush to only touch the edge of that paint. And right now, you can kind of see that this whole leaf is soaking wet. So when I see the light reflecting the water on it, that's what I want. I want a nice wet surface. Bring my yellow back over, and I'm going to just kind of experiment. I want to see what happens. I want you to see what happens when I touch this paint onto this wet surface. I want you to just kind of notice how it spreads out a little bit, and it does some things that are kind of visually interesting. So I would encourage you just to touch a few areas. So wet on wet is often a good way to blend colors. It's a good way to let watercolors do what watercolors do. So, and watercolors like to kind of move on a good paper. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now with this, using this technique. So I have that yellow. I'm going to mix in some other colors just to kind of see what happens. Still, so I'm wetting this paint here. Again, notice I'm not bringing a lot of water onto this plate, so that means that they're not going to blend together. It's not going to just become a big mess of paint on the plate. I can tell from looking at the surface, I still see light reflecting that that it's still a wet surface. That's important frequently with watercolors. So now I'm just touching a couple of areas where maybe I don't see that yellow. And again, I'm just kind of seeing what happens with watercolors. You can see, let me zoom in for you here a little bit so you can see it better. But you can just see how the watercolors are kind of spreading out from wherever I touch that brush. They just kind of expand and kind of fill that space. So because I defined the area and I practiced that control initially, it's very unlikely that watercolors will come outside of the space where the leaf was. So I've got those colors. It's kind of interesting, I think. I'm cleaning my brush now off the camera, And I'm gonna just, on my palette, I'm just adding some water to some green because I think that could be interesting in this leaf. And then again, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna touch some of this color. If I paint, so if I drag the brush across the surface, it's going to do some different things. Because I'm just touching the color into this space, it's allowing the watercolors to kind of mix in the way that they just naturally will. So you may recall, I think I told you in a previous video, this paper that I'm using is 140 pound, and it's cold press, and I'm not going to tip it, but it's hard for you to see. The paper is curving just a little bit on the surface, and that's because the water is causing the fibers inside the paper to shrink a little bit, and so that is the effect that we're getting. With watercolors, less is often more, so if I was to do more on the surface of this leaf, it probably will muddy it. So these colors would start to blend together, and you'd start to lose some of the kind of cool things that happen when you do that wet on wet technique. Thanks for watching.